A routine late-night traffic stop takes an unexpected and dangerous turn when an officer pulls over a black woman without cause. What begins as an ordinary stop soon escalates into a confrontation that will leave him questioning everything he thought he knew about power and control. In an instant, the balance shifts, forcing him to confront a reality he never anticipated. What do you think will happen next? Drop your thoughts in the comments and let us know where you're watching from. Vanessa Carter's hands remained steady on the steering wheel, her breathing controlled, her pulse unwavering. Years of legal battles, high-stakes negotiations, and navigating the intricate corridors of power had conditioned her to remain composed under pressure. But this wasn't a courtroom. This wasn't a debate or a press conference. This was a lonely, dimly lit road with flashing red and blue lights flooding her rearview mirror. And in this moment, none of her titles, accomplishments, or influence carried any weight. She had seen this unfold countless times before, read the reports, listened to the testimonies, fought the cases. The moment she noticed the patrol car tailing her, she had already begun preparing. The tailored blazer draped over her shoulders, the luxury sedan, the leather briefcase filled with legal documents beside her. None of it mattered. Not here. Not now. She exhaled steady and measured as she lowered the window. The officer approached, his flashlight slicing through the darkness, blinding her momentarily. His stance was firm, his presence exuding authority, but his expression remained unreadable beneath the shadow of his cap. "License and registration," he commanded, his tone clipped, offering no courtesy, no explanation. Vanessa moved with deliberate precision, reaching toward the glove compartment with slow, careful motions, ensuring there was no room for misinterpretation, no sudden movements, no risks. "May I ask why I'm being pulled over, officer?" she inquired, her voice smooth, unwavering. His lips pressed into a tight line. "License and registration." The words came again, cold and unyielding. No answer to her question, no acknowledgement that she had spoken at all. She met his gaze for a moment before silently handing over the documents. Without a word, he took them and stepped back toward his vehicle. Vanessa exhaled, her fingers tapping lightly against the wheel. She knew this game. She had fought against it in courtrooms, dissected it in legal reviews, and challenged it in political arenas. But knowing didn't make experiencing it any easier. She watched him through the side mirror as he lingered near his squad car, radioing in her information. She had no doubt about what was happening. A deliberate delay, a subtle test to see how she would respond. She had seen this before, felt it before. The quiet, calculated way power was wielded to unsettle, to provoke. When he returned, something in his demeanor had shifted. He wasn't just a patrol officer conducting a routine stop anymore. He had made a decision about her, about how this would go. "Step out of the vehicle," he ordered. Vanessa remained still, her expression unreadable. "Is there a reason for this request, officer?" she asked, her voice even though she already knew the answer. His jaw tightened. "Step out of the car." Her fingers curled subtly around the steering wheel. She could challenge him, demand justification, assert her rights. But she had seen how these situations could spiral. She had seen too many cases where the outcome was irreversible. Slowly she unbuckled her seatbelt. The door creaked open. The night air was sharp against her skin as she stepped out, her heels clicking softly against the pavement. "Turn around," he commanded. Vanessa arched a brow. "Excuse me?" "You're being detained for suspicious behavior." Suspicious behavior. The phrase was as vague as it was damning. A blanket excuse, a justification wrapped in authority. She could see it in the set of his shoulders, in the rigid way he held himself. He had already determined she was a threat, not because of what she had done, but because of what she represented. Still, she remained poised. "Suspicious behavior," she repeated, as if tasting the words, weighing them. But she didn't argue, didn't fight. Instead, she nodded once and turned, placing her hands lightly behind her back. Silence hung heavy between them. She could feel his hesitation. He had expected defiance, anger, resistance, a plea. Instead, She had given him something else entirely, compliance laced with quiet defiance. She heard the faint clink of metal as he retrieved his handcuffs. "Ma'am, do you have anything in your pockets that could harm me?" A laugh nearly escaped her lips at the absurdity of the question, but she swallowed it down. "No, officer." A pause. Then, "Do you have any outstanding warrants?" This time she did let out a soft chuckle, the sound barely audible in the still night. "No." His grip on her wrist tightened as he began fastening the cuffs around her wrists. Cold metal bit into her skin, but before he could lock them fully, another set of flashing lights cut through the darkness. A second patrol car. Vanessa turned slightly, just enough to see the figure stepping out, Sergeant David Torres. The moment Torres saw her face, recognition flashed in his eyes. "Officer Reynolds," he called, his tone sharp. "What the hell is going on here?" Reynolds straightened. "Routine stop. Suspicious behavior." Torres's gaze flicked to Vanessa. He had seen her before, not in a police database, not in a mugshot, but in courtrooms, at press conferences, on the news. A cold realization dawned on him. But Reynolds, oblivious, unaware of who stood before him, remained steadfast, gripping the cuffs in his hands. Torres exhaled sharply, dragging a hand down his face. Before leveling his subordinate with a hard, unforgiving stare, Sergeant Torres spoke in a low, measured voice. "You just put handcuffs on Vanessa Carter," he muttered, "the governor's attorney." For the first time that night, Officer Blake Reynolds hesitated. Vanessa turned her head just enough to catch the flicker of panic in his eyes. And there it was, the shift. The moment he realized that the power he thought he wielded so effortlessly had slipped through his fingers. She had let him play his game, let him bask in the illusion of control, but now it was her turn. Her voice was calm, almost gentle, when she finally spoke. "I'd like to speak to your captain." Just like that, the night twisted into something else entirely. Reynolds stood frozen, his grip still clamped around Vanessa's wrists, but the weight of his miscalculation settled in fast. His pride resisted, clawing for a foothold, but he could feel Torres's gaze pressing down on him, heavy with judgment. The space between them thickened with unspoken condemnation. "The governor's attorney?" Reynolds echoed, his voice faltering. Torres exhaled sharply, stepping closer. "That's right. And if you had done your job properly, you would have known that before you put cuffs on her." Vanessa remained motionless, her expression unreadable, but inside, she felt it, slow and inevitable, like an oncoming storm, the shift, the unraveling of the officer's assumed dominance. Reynolds swallowed hard, scrambling for an escape. "She was acting suspicious," he stammered. "Didn't answer my questions directly." Torres's voice turned cold, almost dangerous. "Suspicious? What exactly was suspicious? That she was driving her own car? That she had the audacity to ask why you stopped her?" Reynolds clenched his jaw. He had been in control just moments ago. Now, with Torres here, everything was slipping away. Vanessa tilted her head slightly before speaking again, her voice smooth, deliberate. "Sergeant, I'd still like to speak to your captain." Torres nodded without hesitation. "Of course, Ms. Carter." Reynolds felt something drop in his stomach. "Wait a minute," he blurted, desperation creeping into his voice. "There's no need to escalate this. I was just doing my job." Vanessa turned to him fully then, the cuffs still biting into her skin. "Doing your job?" she repeated, her voice soft but razor-sharp. "Tell me, Officer Reynolds, do you pull every driver out of their vehicle during a routine stop, or just the black ones?" A muscle ticked in Reynolds' jaw, but he said nothing. Torres turned to him. "Take the cuffs off. Now." Reynolds hesitated. His pride screamed at him to resist, to salvage some shred of authority. But there was no way out of this. His fingers were stiff as he fumbled for the key, unlocking the metal restraints with jerky movements. Vanessa rubbed her wrists, feeling warmth return to her skin. She didn't flinch, didn't break eye contact. Reynolds, still grasping at control, muttered under his breath, "You could have just complied from the beginning." That was it. Vanessa took a slow step forward, her eyes burning into his. "I did comply," she said, her voice low, cutting through the night air like a blade. "I followed every instruction. I handed you my license. I asked why I was being stopped. And instead of answering, you made a decision." Reynolds had no response. She took another step closer. "You saw a black woman driving late at night, and that was enough for you to decide I was a threat." Torres shifted uncomfortably but remained silent. Vanessa continued, her voice unwavering. "If you had run my plates before stepping out of your car, would you have treated me differently? Or would you have assumed the vehicle was stolen?" Reynolds's hands curled into fists at his sides. "That's not fair," he muttered. Vanessa arched a brow. "Fair?" She let the word hang in the air, then gestured to the empty road around them. "How many people have you stopped tonight?" Reynolds hesitated before answering. "You're my second stop." Vanessa's gaze sharpened. "And was the first driver black?" Silence. Heavy, damning. Torres ran a hand over his face and exhaled. Vanessa let the quiet stretch between them before speaking again, her voice steady. "Would I still be in handcuffs if I wasn't the governor's attorney? Or would I be in the back of your patrol car right now? Would I be spending the night in a holding cell? Would my name be on some report as a potential suspect simply because you decided I didn't belong on this road?" Reynolds looked away, his face hot, not with defiance, but with something else. Something unfamiliar. Shame. Torres finally stepped in. "Ms. Carter, if you want to take this further, you have every right to file a complaint. We can go to the station now." Vanessa considered it. She could end Reynolds's career with a single call, but she knew this was bigger than one officer. He wasn't the disease. He was just a symptom of something far deeper. She let out a slow breath. "I don't want an apology," she said. "I want change." Reynolds blinked. "What?" She met his gaze. "I want to know that this moment isn't just going to be another forgotten mistake. I want to know that next time you'll think before you act, that the next person you stop, someone who looks like me, won't have to prove they belong." Torres turned to Reynolds. "You hear that, officer?" Reynolds swallowed hard and nodded, but Vanessa wasn't convinced. "Say it," she pressed. His throat tightened. He had spent his entire career being trained to command authority, to never back down. But standing before Vanessa now, he felt something he hadn't expected. Regret. "I hear you," he said quietly, "and I'll think about it." Vanessa studied him for a long moment, then gave a small nod. "Good," she said, "because next time I won't be so forgiving." With that, she turned and walked back to her car, leaving Reynolds standing there, fists still clenched at his sides. Torres watched her go, then turned back to him. "You got lucky tonight," he muttered. "This could have ended a whole lot worse for you." Reynolds didn't respond, because deep down, he knew Torres was right. As Vanessa pulled onto the road, the red and blue lights fading in her rearview mirror, she couldn't shake the weight pressing down on her chest. She had won tonight, but how many others wouldn't? That question haunted her more than anything. The drive back to her hotel was quiet, but her mind was anything but. The night's events replayed over and over, each moment tightening the coil of frustration inside her. She had walked away unharmed, her career intact, her dignity unbroken. But how many others had done everything right just as she had, only to find that doing everything right meant nothing when the officer had already decided they were wrong? Her phone vibrated on the passenger seat, a call from the governor. The phone vibrated once, then twice, before Vanessa finally answered. "Vanessa." The governor's voice was measured, calm, but she could hear the strain beneath it, the tension coiled tight. "I just got off the phone with Sergeant Torres. Are you all right?" Vanessa exhaled slowly, pressing her fingers against the steering wheel. "I'm fine," she said, though the weight in her chest told another story. "But we have a problem, Governor. A much bigger one than I initially thought." There was silence on the other end, the kind that told her he was thinking, absorbing. She imagined him in his office, pacing the way he always did when confronted with something too big to ignore. Tell me, he said at last. Vanessa tightened her grip. Officer Reynolds isn't an anomaly. He's a symptom. He detained me without probable cause, without justification, only a gut feeling. And that gut feeling? It's been shaped by the same bias that's been left to fester in precincts all across this state. A pause. Then, I want you in my office first thing in the morning. Understood. She ended the call just as she pulled into the parking garage of her hotel. The adrenaline that had sustained her through the night was fading now, leaving only exhaustion in its wake. But sleep wasn't an option. Not yet. Vanessa made her way up to her suite, locked the door behind her, and went straight to her laptop. If she was going to hold Officer Reynolds accountable, she needed more than outrage. She needed proof. A few keystrokes later, she was staring at his record. The pattern was clear, woven into years of complaints. Reports of racial bias. An excessive number of stops targeting Black and Latino drivers. Minor infractions excused as routine police work. Each complaint filed away, reviewed, dismissed, forgotten. Vanessa's jaw tightened. This wasn't just about Reynolds. She expanded her search, pulling data from the precinct. The same patterns emerged. Officers under the same command making the same kinds of stops, targeting the same communities. The problem wasn't a single officer. It was a system built to protect its own, even at the cost of those it swore to serve. Her hands hovered over the keyboard. The evidence was damning. The governor wanted action, and she was going to give it to him. Morning came, and Vanessa sat across from Governor Richardson in his office, her laptop open on his desk. He read through the data in silence, his brow furrowed, his fingers pressed together in deep thought. Finally he sighed, rubbing his temple. This is bad. Vanessa didn't blink. It's worse than bad, she said, her voice even but unyielding. It's systemic. This precinct, this entire department has been turning a blind eye to racial profiling for years. The numbers don't lie. The governor leaned back in his chair, considering. What do you propose? Vanessa folded her hands in her lap, meeting his gaze without hesitation. Accountability. Immediate suspension for Officer Reynolds while a full investigation takes place. An independent review board to audit past cases. And uncover patterns of misconduct. Mandatory anti-bias training for every officer, from the ground up. The governor exhaled, tapping his fingers against the desk. You know there will be pushback. Of course. Vanessa's tone didn't waver. The union will fight it. The brass will call it unnecessary. But if we don't act now, this will happen again. And next time? It might not end with just a pair of handcuffs. The governor studied her for a long moment, then nodded. I'll make the call. A weight lifted from Vanessa's chest, but she knew better than to feel relief. This was only the beginning. That afternoon, Officer Reynolds sat in the precinct's break room, staring at his phone, scrolling mindlessly. He hadn't slept, not really. His mind kept replaying the night before, the way things had unraveled so quickly, so completely. The station buzzed with quiet murmurs, officers throwing him sidelong glances, some avoiding his eyes altogether. He could feel the shift. Something had changed. Then the captain's voice cut through the room like a blade. Reynolds, my office, now. His stomach clenched as he set his phone down and followed. The captain's office was lined with awards, commendations, testaments to a career built on discipline and command. But today, there was no pride in the captain's gaze, only frustration. Sit. Reynolds obeyed, his back stiff. The captain folded his hands on the desk, his expression unreadable. Do you have any idea what kind of mess you've created? Reynolds swallowed, his throat dry. Sir, Save it, the captain cut him off. The governor himself called this morning. We're launching an independent review of every stop made in the last 3 years. He let the words hang, waiting for them to sink in. And guess whose name keeps coming up? Reynolds' stomach twisted. The review board will be here next week, the captain continued. Until then, you're suspended, effective immediately. The words hit him like a gut punch. Suspended? Sir? I didn't do anything wrong. The captain's expression darkened. And that's exactly the problem, Reynolds. You don't even see it. Silence stretched between them, thick and suffocating. Finally, Reynolds stood, his fists tightening at his sides. "This is political," he muttered. "That woman, she has connections. That's the only reason this is happening." The captain's gaze was like ice. "No, Reynolds. This is happening because you put an innocent woman in handcuffs without cause. And this department is done covering for bad policing." Reynolds turned on his heel and stormed out, his pulse pounding in his ears. He wasn't sure who he was more furious with, Vanessa Carter, the governor, or himself. That evening, Vanessa sat in a quiet coffee shop, her fingers wrapped around a warm mug. The day had been a whirlwind. Meetings, interviews, calls. Progress was being made. It was slow, it was messy, but it was real. She stared out the window as the city moved around her, her mind still turning when her phone vibrated against the table. A text from an unknown number. "I heard about the review board. Maybe this will make a difference." Maybe. Vanessa stared at the message for a long time, then typed a response. "I hope so. It has to." She set her phone down, exhaling. This had never been just about her. It never would be. And that was why she couldn't stop now. Not ever.